Welcome everyone to this online learning material about introduction to permaculture and social permaculture with a mental health focus. This is a material that we developed to be used in advance before our trainings. I'll explain a little bit more. My name is Kinga Milankovic. I'm co-founder of Hekate Conscious Aging Foundation and a permaculturist. Just about my background, and this material has been developed in the framework of an Erasmus project. The title is Social Permaculture, Empowering an Active Society or Social Peace. And we were together with Friends of the Earth Cyprus, Friends of the Earth Malta, Promimpresa, Intras, ICEP. And in this project, we developed together an online core course, which is teaching material and online learning platform. And whoever is finishing this course can have a certificate. Just a little bit, that was a little bit about the background of the project. And throughout the project, we were together, the project partners, to develop this core course. And each partner has kind of slightly different target groups and different setups. And for us, for Hekate, our focus is on mental health, permaculture and mental health. And our target groups are typically aging individuals, mental health specialists, community leaders, therapists, social workers, and also teachers, and other people who are interested in permaculture and mental health. What is important to mention is that our focus is on activities and support, which is not necessarily garden related. So the course itself can be done online, and also those who are following the course, like community leaders or therapists or social workers, the idea is that people will get support on how to set up their social permaculture projects, not necessarily garden related. So even if somebody is interested in doing a permaculture, social permaculture project, that kind of design, but they don't have the garden or a garden, and they're just interested in how permaculture can be used to support mental health, this course will be suitable for them as well. So our focus is to develop this course, which is an online course to these target groups, and it consists of 8 online sessions, online training sessions. Maximum 15 participants can participate, and we focus on like a co-creation of projects that the individuals can deliver in their own backgrounds, in their own setups, in their own communities, or in their own therapy. Also, our aim is to have an online learning and support community for those and of those who are interested in using permaculture and social permaculture to support mental health of their own target groups or patients. And because it's a relatively new area, our aim is to hold space for individuals who are interested in this so that we can support each other when we develop these specific permaculture and social permaculture projects. So as I say, the course itself has 8 online sessions. But before we start these online sessions, there are 3 videos that can be watched in advance for each participant. And this one that you are currently watching is the first one. So we have these 3 different videos, online learning materials, and you are encouraged to watch them before you participate in the course. And the idea with this is that there are some basics in permaculture and social permaculture, and some concepts and models and ideas that can be, followed in advance. So we don't need to spend time together on the basics, but we can focus more on your own individual activities and to do your own individual designs based on the community co-creation activity in the course, and based on these 3 videos and learning materials. So as I mentioned, our focus is on permaculture and mental health. So just a little bit about the wider social context. We are talking about mental health, harmony, health, and our aim is to achieve a healthy society, let's say. But if we look around ourselves these days, either on individual level or family level or society level, community level, or nature itself, we are facing all kinds of problems, issues, crises, like biodiversity loss, climate change, care crisis, social inequalities and injustice, economic crises, the mental health impacts of the pandemic. We hear more and more about climate anxiety, especially among younger people, climate depression, COVID depression, isolation, loneliness, all sorts of things. So in a society and in an environment like this, how can one keep or maintain or regain her or his health and mental health? Sometimes people say that in an ill society, it's very difficult not to get ill. So having mental health issues, in a way, sometimes can be seen as a very healthy response to all these crises. So what do we do? What do we do on an individual level? How do we react to all these as a society? What kind of coping mechanisms there are? It's a little bit of an overgeneralization here, but just to give you an idea. Still many people, although less and less, for example, are in denial about climate change, for example. You can also see narratives that are belittling the problems. There's this be positive movement, which has advantages, but also disadvantages. I'm not going into details here. I'm just giving you some hints. There are also symbolic responses and actions. Greenwashing is really getting big. What is very interesting, the response of the deep adaptation movement. We are not going into that either, but I suggest that you read about this. This is really interesting and exciting, but it's not really the topic for today. Also, there are individuals and communities to try to find systematic response to all these crises. And one possible response can also be permaculture-based, conscious, holistic actions. And this is that we want to focus on now. So this video and today's topic, our topics are, we're going to talk about classic permaculture, social permaculture, and how permaculture and mental health are related or can be related, or how can we use permaculture to support mental health related activities. And as I mentioned, there are 3 videos, and this is the first one. So let's focus on permaculture, classic permaculture a little bit. If you have a look at this picture, permaculture had this perception in the past. There is this messy garden and there's this lazy person or people creating messy gardens. And this is how permaculture was seen for quite a long time, even now sometimes. But thankfully it's changing. So what is permaculture and where does it come from? The word itself comes from permanent agriculture. And Bill Mollison is often mentioned as kind of founder of permaculture, although he wasn't really the founder of permaculture. Permaculture methods and the permaculture kind of system development exists in traditional communities. So it was more like when the Western world reinvented these practices that are in harmony with nature. And also permaculture can be seen as really just like common sense. And we'll go into that a little bit more. One might ask the question, what is the difference between organic gardening and permaculture? And if you stop the video here a little bit and just think about it. What's the difference between organic gardening and permaculture? Sometimes I will suggest you to stop the video and either read the slide or think a little bit before we carry on. And this is now the first one. And if you continue watching, so what's the difference between organic gardening and permaculture? The difference is that in permaculture, we are designing complex systems. And organic gardening is basically managing or creating a garden that is not using fertilizers or pesticides, just very simply put. So in permaculture, we are consciously designing and building complex systems. And these systems, and it will be very interesting from the point of view of mental health, these systems have many connections in themselves, and also they create resilient structures, or they make resilient structures. And it's going to be important when we go deeper into the mental health aspects. I suggest that you stop the video again and read these definitions. And now that you hopefully read them, what I'd like to draw your attention to is that there's not just one definition of permaculture. If you speak with permaculturists, you will see that quite often the definitions are quite diverse themselves, depending on the focus of the person or the context, the climate, either, or the social context in which the definition is given. Which also, first of all, I think it's quite interesting. And also, it kind of shows the very nature of permaculture, which is very often quite diverse, depending on local circumstances and perceptions and narratives around this. So, for example, permanent agriculture, as it started, Sometimes people say permaculture is an innovative framework for creating sustainable ways of living. I'm not going to read them all, but from the old days when it was seen as like food production or nature related stuff, by now the movement has developed significantly. It's not only related to natural systems anymore, but also social systems. And this definition, the last one, is also quite interesting. And if you think about it a little bit, that permaculture is a simple yet complex philosophical and practical approach to how to live life on Earth in a sustainable manner. It's a very abstract definition. And based on that, we can derive narratives and also quite practical and technical actions on how to use permaculture in a mental health related setup. We'll talk about that more. Okay, so now we understand that there are different definitions of permaculture and different scopes, but there are a number of very basic theoretical milestones or basics that are very important to know about permaculture. And these are quite well established, and even though the movement is still growing and developing, and it's not a static thing, the permaculture movement itself, these are some of the elements that are just there, like the ethics of permaculture, the flower of permaculture, and the design principles. We'll go into that in a minute. And also, as the movement develops, there are now another three models or logical frameworks that I'd like to show you, which relates to more like the social scope of permaculture, about human needs, the 4 freedom pillars, and the 8 capital types. Now we are going into details around that, and these are very important to know about. I mean, I don't suggest that you learn them, but once we start working together in the course, we will refer to this a lot. So if you just remember the idea, that will already be helpful. First one, permaculture ethics. Really quite simple in a way, but if you think about it and its applications and implications, then it becomes quite widespread. So whatever you do or whatever we do in permaculture, it should be in harmony with the ethics of permaculture, which is earth care, people care, and fair share. Quite simple. And even though it's simple, and it really is simple, the implications are not that simple, because when you design your project, you will need to value and prioritize all the elements in your system, like the resources you have, where you put 1 unit of energy, when you put 1 unit of money, how is it going to be the best or the most efficient from the point of view of permaculture ethics. And in a way, these ethics will help you to set your priorities, because then you will go through this process. Okay, shall I do this or shall I do that? To what extent? And if you evaluate your own thinking and your own actions based on the ethics, for example, it will help you to be the most effective, to find the most effective decisions and actions. Just try to be sure that whatever you decide to do, yourself in your practice or with your community, you consider these ethical basics. Another one, as I mentioned, the flower of permaculture. So the flower of permaculture, if you have a look at this, you will see that clearly it's not only about gardening anymore. In the center, there are the ethics and also the design principles. We'll go into the design principles after this one. And the flower of permaculture and the petals of the flower show the different focus areas that we need to think about. For example, when we are developing a community, a permaculture community, for example, if you think about a village or like a housing community, a sustainable co-housing community, for example, these are the petals that you will probably need to consider and make decisions about these on how you want to build your own system. And you focus on the building, maybe tools and technology, what to use, what not to use, why. In a community, education and culture is going to be very important. Health and spiritual well-being, finances, economics. How do you manage your community and the land? How you govern? How do you make your decisions as a community? And of course, the original one, how you manage your land and the nature around you. And this spiral here shows how these petals are interconnected and each one has an impact on the other ones. So that's the flower of permaculture. And on that slide, you will see actions. For example, in the building petal, you will see like passive solar design or education and culture, participatory arts and music. These are initiatives that certain communities are already working on. Like one of them is not permaculture in itself, like a passive solar design itself is not permaculture. But if you have a look at all these initiatives or actions or things that people do, you will see how it comes together systematically. And when you have the design, which we'll go into in the next slide, these are the elements and these are the already piloted or up and running systems that you can use or think about. These are just ideas, obviously. There are many, 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 many more. It's just for you to give an idea of what kind of examples you could think about under each petal. Permaculture design principles. So just think about this. You want to do permaculture either in a garden setup or in a non-garden setup. And you want to do something that is sustainable or regenerative. You want to follow the ethics of permaculture and you want to develop a holistic system, let's say. But how do you do that? And the permaculture design principles help with that. There are these 12 principles by David Holmgren, and these can be very helpful before you start your design. Just think about that, like observe and interact, catch and store energy, obtain a yield, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. I'm not going to read them all. Perhaps you want to stop the video a little bit now and just think a little bit about each of them. And now, if you read them all, you will see that these are quite simple in a way, but also quite abstract principles or suggestions. And these can be very useful to think about before you start your project or your development. And even though they look simple, and they are simple, after doing permaculture for 20 some years, for me, these are always things to think about, like use small and slow solutions. I use these in my life in general. So it's not only about how I run my permaculture garden, but it's also about how I want to define my next project, for example. How quickly do I want to implement something? So these are principles that really help me to have, in many ways, quite sustainable, from my point of view and from my life's point of view, actions. And if you have a look at these principles, originally they were defined in the old days to support garden-related or food-related or permanent agriculture-related systems. But if you think about some of them, actually all of them, but I highlighted with red the ones that can be really quite useful in non-garden setups, in community setups, for example, you can see how much sense they make. For example, before you start doing a community project, just observe and interact. Just go slow, you know, see and listen, start talking, listen, and then interact. Again, I'm not going into details here. The learning material that we develop in the course with the other partners include a lot of text about this. And it will be available for you to read. For now, I just want to encourage you to think about these in a social non-garden context. For example, use and value diversity, how much sense it makes in a community. Or, for example, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. How do you set up a system with vulnerable people, for example, as a community leader or a teacher or a therapist? How do you design a system in which feedback is part of the feedback loops, is properly part of the system, for example? Also, for example, the last one, creatively use and respond to change. Just think about how useful this approach is, especially these days. So that's the permaculture design principles. Now we had, you see the flower here, ethics, design principles, and the flower. These are the original basics of permaculture. A little more here, especially in garden design or food systems design, but not only. We talk a lot about zones. It's just for you to have a little bit of an insight to that, but we are not going into details here. So the zones, zone 0 is the house. And as you go further from zone 0, you go less and less to these places. So you will have a system where you put things to zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, depending on how often typically you visit these areas. And again, we are not going into details. It's just for you to remember that there are these permaculture zones that permaculturists often talk about. Another thing, that's the layers. Compared to monoculture, for example, when we have just like a field of grain and we want to have a yield from one crop, in permaculture systems, we like to have layers. and each layer is supporting the other layers. They are all interconnected, and we have harvest, some kind of harvest or functionality or like ecosystem service offered by the different layers. So just think about or remember the layers. Let me just go back to the design principles. I'd like to highlight the obtain a yield principle, principle number 3. This is very important, and that's with our permaculture thinking, obtaining a yield is always in the focus. We design, develop systems, and we want to obtain a yield, which can be like food, but can also be energy or nice feelings, happiness, health, you name it. But always think about, before you do your actions, what are the yields that you would like to harvest? And we'll go back to this yield thing once we go into the mental health focus. So I just wanted to highlight it for now, because I forgot it when we were here at the principles. And when we talk about the layers, you will see that each layer is probably offering all sorts of yields. It's very important. Okay, so these are the traditional permaculture items that you will find useful to remember. And now we are entering more of a human and social space. And as I said, as the movement develops, people are now focusing the social aspects of permaculture as well. If you think about the ethics like people care, earth care, and fair share, traditionally the earth care was in the focus of the movement. And now the people care element and the fair share element is gaining more and more importance in the movement itself. And as part of this process, this book was written by Hemingway, The Permaculture City. This is a really good book. I highly recommend to read or have a look. And in that book, he further develops the permaculture flower. And the model is this particular model is focusing on human needs. So you will see again the petals, but the focus is on human needs. So the petals are the specific needs, human needs. Again, we are not going into deep details. It's just for you to know that this model exists. And you will also see the personal, the local, and regional layers of the needs. And again, just like with the permaculture flower, these are all interconnected. Just remember the human needs as a model. This one is a very interesting one also, designed by the 7th Generation Design. You will see it on their website as well. So the freedoms of people, as now we are in a social space of permaculture. And when you are going to design your own social permaculture activities or practice, if you are a community leader or a therapist or a social worker or a mental health expert or a teacher, maybe you will also find interesting to focus a little bit on freedom and how you want to support your own community members or your own clients to increase their freedom. I mean, it's a complicated topic and it's not really the focus of this material. One might say that not everybody wants freedom and it's a whole debate around freedom. But for those who are interested in freedom and who think it's an important thing to have, this model is also this model can also be useful. And when we talk about freedom, this model has 4 major areas: time, health, wealth, and spirit. So it's not only about having money or having material freedom, but also to have enough time, for example, to have the best possible health, and to be free in spirit. At the conscious aging community that we run at the foundation, quite a few people consciously aging, and they come to us saying that they are in their 40s or 50s. They worked throughout their whole lives. They have the money now, but they have very limited amount of time. Their health is not really good. Their family relationships are quite broken, and they don't feel really good. In fact, they say that they're not feeling good at all. And that's an interesting approach to look at freedom from these aspects. So how can I improve my situation or my level of freedom in the time dimension? How can I have more time, or how can I be healthier, or how can my mind be freer in a way? What can I do? And when you design support actions, for example, this is something that you can also think about and work with these elements a little bit. And in that process, this last model that I'm going to show you might help. This is from the same book, The Permaculture City, in which he differentiates 8 different capital types. And if you have a look at it, financial kind of capital and material capital, like a house, for example, or a car. He identifies other types of capitals as well, like social capital or spiritual capital or experiential capital or cultural capital, which are not related necessarily to material wealth. And when you try to support people, or when you try to develop your own life, you might be able to improve your capital, like your intellectual capital, experimental capital, without really needing any more money or any more material stuff. And when you want to improve your freedoms, you can also think about what kind of capitals you have in these dimensions and how you can utilize them to improve your situation or your own mental health or the mental health and situation of the people you are supporting. Just think about these capital types and be more conscious about that. But again, we are going to work with these in the course. Okay, so this is a lot of material so far, and we are not at the end. But just to summarize permaculture a little bit, at this point, we can say that permaculture is the radical notion that living in harmony with nature and one another is a possible social, economic concept. And we want to see permaculture like that. Doing permaculture helps to make sense of change, helps to find the space for meaningful and holistic contribution, and it settles the mind and soul in a meaningful and proactive way. And if you think about this one, you will probably see by now that permaculture can really be a good tool to support mental health or mental health related actions or activities, either in a garden setup or in a non-garden setup. And teaching permaculture is a gentle way to help next generations to prepare and adjust to the changing environment, right? So if you think about all the crises that I mentioned at the beginning of this material, you will see, hopefully by now, clearly, even if you are brand new to permaculture, that it's like a box of treasures. And we can just unfold these. And you can unfold these in your own personal development or practice development. And hopefully by now you feel that there are stuff that might be very, very useful for you in your own work or in your own individual life. Okay, so it's all nice and good, but when we, for example, develop a permaculture garden, we are talking about long-term planning, right? If we just start planting the trees, by the time it's going to be established, it can be like 10, 20, 30 years. So when we design permacultural systems in a garden setup, it's typically a long-term planning. Includes tree planting, systems development, building structures, building a local ecosystem. Time is a factor. And also probably money and resources. So how are we going to use permaculture when we don't necessarily have 20 years or we don't necessarily have any resources or a lot of resources? And as I said at the beginning, we are not only focusing on garden setups. In fact, we are going to focus on non-garden setups a lot. So how can we use then on a practical level, on a pragmatic level, permaculture? For example, if you are in a school or in a community, in a mental health home, how can we do this when there is not necessarily enough space, staff, resources? What are we talking about? And if you think about the permaculture flower, if you remember it, you remember that there are all sorts of petals that are not just related to gardens, right? So how are we going to use permaculture? In the course, we will go through with the participants, we will go through a design process in which each participant will have the chance to design their own actions based on their own background and focus and setup and resources. For now, I just want to give a couple of examples. Some of them are space related, but some of them are not going to be like garden or schoolyard or yard related. Just to give you a little bit of a hint in advance on what kind of directions our thinking might wander. So, for example, for school or community project ideas, if there is no garden, for example, and you don't have like many months or years to develop, you can just do, for example, growing from seeds in a class or community space and play around this either with kids or with clients and use this seed growing activity to support mental health related activities. school and community gardens, which are not like, they are not attended all the time, right? People come and go, school holidays. So you need to think about this as not a permanent space. Another possibility is to cooperate with local permaculturists who are there on site, and you can just go there and do things together with them, but you don't need to be responsible for the whole thing. There is something which is called vermiculture, and it sounds like permaculture, but it's not. Vermiculture is when you will see this box here. This is a vermiculture box, and we set it up with school kids in a school environment. And the idea is that kitchen waste or kitchen scraps are recycled and turned into compost by worms, earthworms. These are quite small systems and can be left alone for weeks and months even if it's properly designed. So even in a school environment, it can be very useful. We are not going into details again. This is not our focus. It's just for you to know that if you dig into vermiculture, that's something that can be very well used in a non-garden setup. We will also discuss some community activities that are totally non-garden related in a minute. And also what might be interesting is the partner or care involvement if you design systems related to that. These are just a few ideas. We'll see more, but these are just for you to see that you don't necessarily have to design like a 20-year project in a stable garden. If you want to do permaculture, you can have a lot shorter, a lot more focused permaculture projects, all depending on your time, space, energy, resources, and people available. It's just for you to know that you don't need to have a garden to do permaculture to support mental health. Yeah, so that was the vermiculture thing. Just a couple of other ideas. You can have like tree planting. This one is a tree planting activity, which is like a one-off. You could have outdoor learning activities in nature, for example, with your target groups. You can develop structures. This is a dryer. It's an air flow dryer, which was like a community event with the kids. We built it together and then we used it to dry fruit. And of course, people and kids, it wasn't just one time. This one was with the kids, but building such a structure and also use it in community events can be quite uplifting. In urban setups, urban permaculture, which is still nature related with these community gardens, for example, or this is like on rooftops or balconies, you can have little permaculture systems. And this one, for example, was a very interesting one during the pandemic. It happened in Malta, where restaurants had to close down, and this project was initiated by the owner of these restaurants. And his idea was that the ladies or the staff working for the restaurants could do voluntary work in a farm, and they got these boxes of vegetables and food. And the restaurant owner, had this cooperation with the farmers, and the farmers got help, and also they could sell their products through these restaurant owners. The restaurant owner got money from the government to keep the jobs, and this is how he could make sense of the situation. The staff had something to do, and they also got food. So it was a very interesting local complex system, which was good for the farmers, good for the restaurant, good for the people, good for the environment. It was a very interesting and quite uplifting one, actually, during the pandemic. I was helping to deliver these boxes to the ladies, and you can see they're smiling, and these are also the stuff that they received. And we sorted it out together, and we connected, and it was a really, really nice experience, being in a quite depressed period of time, or depressing period of time. Okay, these are some other examples. For example, the Bristol pound, which unfortunately is not working anymore, but like local money or local exchange systems can also be permaculture designed. If you think about the permaculture flower, or community actions, for example, there was this action about saving the bees some time ago. For example, here is the care element, all kinds of activities that are related to the people care ethics, and how to set up care systems in the community, for example, especially in times in Europe where there's a severe care crisis. So how you set up a system that is related to care, either mental health care or elderly care or just care in general. It can also be related to permaculture petals. This is a rather complex example of permaculture development. Jánoshide is a village in Hungary, and our foundation, Hekate Kancsaging Foundation, we are working together with the local municipality, Jánoshide municipality, and it's an aging village. Young people are leaving the place, and the whole idea is to regenerate the village so that it's focusing on care, and the village is going through a permaculture-based transition in which the local care system is improved, and also local permaculture systems are being developed, and also we try to attract young people to come to the space and revitalize the whole village based on permaculture principles. So just kind of summarizing now, if you look at, again, the permaculture flower and the petals, you will see that in all kinds of areas of a community life or an individual life, there are aspects and developing actions or designing actions based on any of the elements, based on permaculture ethics and design principles. There is a lot of lots of opportunities that we can think about to define our actions. And how does it go back to mental health? When we develop these permaculture-based systems, these are pretty much, I mean, these are terms that we use a lot when we develop the systems. if you look at these terms, for example, care or community or action or dialogue or co-creation, consciousness, intimacy, respect, these are the terms that we really quite often use when we design our systems, even if it's related to any of the petals, non-garden as well. And if you think about them, these are also the terms. I mean, it's not a full list. It's just for you to have a little bit of an idea of what we are dealing with in terms of terms around permaculture. But if you think about these are also terms that we very often use when we work with mental health related problems or issues or solutions. These are pretty much terms that are very important when we want to improve mental health, right? Connection, care, kindness, respect, action, community. Just think about that. So when you design a system or an action for yourself based on, for yourself personally or for your clients or target groups, when you design, when we are going to design these actions and systems together, targeted to people in need, in mental health need, just think about how useful these systems can be in a mental health setup, right? So hopefully by now, as we are approaching the end of this first video, you will have a good sense of how permaculture and the complexity and the simplicity of permaculture can be used can be used to develop actions and systems that help mental health related aspects. And just going back to this image, when we discussed all the crises that are related to like individual or family or social or nature level, wherever you are in your individual careers or your individual life, you can have different focuses. And when we do the course together, participants will bring their own backgrounds and narratives and approaches. And the whole idea of permaculture in that setup is that we are going to use permaculture practices and principles and ethics to make solutions or create actions or do therapy that is designed based on permaculture to support mental health. So if you remember where the permaculture movement comes from, and think about what permaculture has to offer in the 2030s, for example, hopefully you will see that there is a lot of resources and a lot of ideas and options that you can make a harvest from if you define and design your actions based on permaculture. That's all for the first video. You are welcome to go back to the details if you wish so, but we will go into more depth during the course. You will find more information about our own activities on these websites, and also we have a Hecate Conscious Aging Club, which is like an online discussion. It's free to participate, and we have discussions around the topics. And you can register there and just connect with the community even before you take a course with us, or just connect with us more. Thank you for listening, and hope you find the material useful, and see you at the course or elsewhere in the space.